Greetings hominids! So if you follow ISLA Instruments, you may have seen that I've been doing the video manual for the S2400. And whilst those videos are really in-depth guides on how to use the S2400, I've had a number of people ask me to do a video about it on my channel. So what I'm going to do is recycle some of the material from those video manuals and give a kind of broad overview of what the S2400 is and what it does for people who either don't know or who have some idea but want to know more. So what is the S2400? Well, it's inspired by the EMU SP1200 from the 80s, although it's been modernised in many, many ways. So in a nutshell, it's a drum machine, it's a sampler, it's a sequencer, and it's a live looper. You put an SD card in the back, which you can then format on the machine. You hook it up to your computer over USB and go into something called USB machine mode. It then appears as an external hard drive on your computer. You drag and drop files over to it, come back out of USB machine mode, and the sounds are then ready to be assigned to your tracks. There are 4 banks of 8 tracks, so 32 tracks, and those route to 8 channel outputs like the SP1200, so it's got 8 voice polyphony effectively. So the most basic thing you can do with it is take some drum samples, which I took from my TR-707 driven through a Boss KMC 60 mixer, so they're a little bit dirty. I assigned them to some tracks and made a pattern with them. So that's a great start, but that's the most primitive thing you can do with the S2400. There's oh so much more to it. So when you assign a sample to a track, you have a set of parameters. First of all, there's these DSP filters at the top, and there are other filters on the machine which I'll discuss throughout the video. There's cutoff and resonance, and they're multi-mode. They can be low pass, band pass, high pass. You then have a level. You have pitch, and there's 2 audio engines. There's a classic engine, which is 26 kilohertz 12 bits, so that gets really crunchy and loaded with aliasing when you start repitching. And then there's a hi-fi audio engine as well, if you don't want that. There's also scaling as well, different scalings, classic 32, classic 16, like the EMU machines. Then there's semitones, diatonic, aeolian, and also fine, which is great when you're trying to pitch a loop to match a tempo. You can really dial that in. There's 3 envelopes. There's a classic amp envelope like the EMU machines that you can engage or disengage. Then there's 2 hi-fi envelopes, which are AHD SHR envelopes that can be assigned to amplitude, filter cutoff, and pitch, and they're bipolar as well. So you can then really start playing around and manipulating the sounds with those. Then there's loop slice, so you don't have to import a one-shot sample. You can import a long piece of audio, and it could be anything, and then you slice a section out of it, or you loop a sliced section from it. So this opens things out way more. So for the next example, I recorded some chords off the synths behind me, dropped them onto a track, and then cut slices out of it and repitched those chords to make a chord sequence. I took a drum loop that was recorded by a friend that wasn't done to a click track, so it didn't have an exact tempo. I cut out a section of it and looped it, and then pitched it down so that it matched the tempo, but because it's not to a click, it's kind of got a push-pull kind of thing to it, which is really nice. Also recorded in a bass line that I looped, and also then just some patterns with some one-shots as well. So let's listen to that. Okay, so straight away you can tell it's so much more than a drum machine. but we're barely getting started. So those parameters I mentioned, the filters, level, pitch, envelope, loop, slice, you can then go into something called multi-mode, and then you get 8 more sets of those parameters for a track. And you can sync them so they're all active at the same time. So in the next example, I took a single note from my TB303 over my shoulder there, and I then assigned it to 8 multis, changed the pitch of them, changed the envelope settings, changed the filter types and the pitch modulation and all that kind of stuff, and then made a whole kind of squelchy bass line out of just one note on the machine, which was contained within one track and its multis. I then had all my other tracks and channels free for doing other stuff at the same time. So in terms of sequencing, you can obviously record in the rhythmic information, but you can record into the pattern, the level, the pitch, the envelope, the loop slice, the filter position and resonance per step. And you can do that by hitting the pads against a click track, and you've got obviously quantized settings, so you've got swing, all that stuff that you'd expect. You can also flip over to TR mode, and the mute and solo buttons are repurposed as the tracker of where you are in a pattern, like TR machines, and then you can select steps as you see fit. And there's also a proper step programmer as well, and you can make your whole pattern in here, but you can also record something in and then go into the step program, navigate to a step, and it will show you all the events that happened on that step. You can then go through those events, go into one, and then change the envelope settings or the filter settings for that step, so you can post-edit anything you've done, which is absolutely fantastic. In terms of patterns, a project can have 100 patterns in it, and they can be up to 100 bars long, so you're not going to run out of that. And you can go into a song mode and say, play this pattern 3 times, then this pattern once, then loop that, as you'd expect. But you can also put into there the mute and solo states of tracks, and that can be across the banks as well. So you can say at this point, mute or unmute these tracks without you having to touch them. You can also change the tempo, and that can be absolute tempo changes or relative, -5 BPM relative to the track's master tempo. There's also, you can go to a sub song and back from within that menu. So there's loads of more comprehensive stuff you can do there. So in this next example, I've chopped up a load of vocals I recorded with a vocoder and some other samples, and then I've gone into song mode and told it to play things back in a certain order, and I've just played along with some other instruments. Okay, but things are now going to get even more sexy because it has these rear inputs for sampling from external devices, which of course includes vinyl, which is fantastic. So you've got these pairs of jack inputs and these phono inputs, and the first of each have analog anti-aliasing filters on them. Those are SSI 2144s, like the original EMU did. So those colour the sound if you use those inputs. These inputs do not. So if you want a clean, unfiltered sound, you use those. It takes everything from instrument level to line level. There's a trim. There's also different gain multipliers as well. Now you can sample at 48 kilohertz, or you can sample at 26 kilohertz via these inputs. And if you play back vinyl fast at 26 kilohertz and then pitch it down afterwards, which is what they used to do back in the day, via the filtered inputs And then you use the output filters. There are 6 output filters. Channels 1 and 2 have dynamic filters, SSI, low pass, which are controlled by a basic RC envelope. And then it's got 4 fixed op-amp filters on channels 3 to 6. If you do all that, then you get a really soupy retro sound, which I know a lot of people are really excited about. So for this next example, I sampled a section from one of Don Muro's tracks called Mountain Song. I had Don's permission to do that. If you don't know Don's music, I'm going to link it in the description because he's an absolute treasure. He really is, and he's got a fascinating story as well. And I sampled from his record using that old school method, and it came out like this. In terms of rear connections, there's everything you'd hope there would be. Of course, there's MIDI in, out and through. And at the time of recording, there's just about to be a big update on the MIDI stuff. And that's a great thing about a modern instrument like this. You can have firmware updates to improve functionality or fix bugs and things. There's USB-B, USB host. The SD card is there, as I've mentioned. There's clock in or out, which is a pulse, which you can use for modular gear or anything that accepts clock. The inputs I've covered. There's a stereo bus mix out, and you can use that in mono as well if you want. And there are channel outs as well. There's also an earth on the end here as well for people using record players. So the next example, I've loaded a load of sounds on here, programmed a bunch of different beats, and gone into song mode and told it what to do when playing those beats back. I've then taken the clock out into the Reich sequencer in the 100M behind me, and I've taken the MIDI clock out into a BeatStep Pro. So I've got 2 more sequencers available for the modular as well. And here's that all running together. There's also an 8-track looper, and how that works is it goes round and round and overdubs and goes into a memory buffer. And if you don't like what you've done, you can just remove it from the buffer, or you can press one of the A buttons and add that to the active live loop. You can then go over to any of the other live loop tracks and start adding things to those as well. And you've got a duration of 19.4 seconds to work with for a loop, so plenty there. You can then save your loops as WAV files and then import them back onto a track and then manipulate them using all the parameters as well. So that's a really fantastic feature. So I hope that gives a broad overview of what the S2400 is and the kind of things you can do with it. I'm really skimming over the surface of the functionality in this video because it's an overview video and I don't want it to get too long. But if you are interested in the nitty-gritty and want to know the specifics of what something is or what it sounds like, I've linked the video manual in the description. There's already an hour and a half's worth of material over there, so that will answer everything. But I hope this will tell you whether this is something that you're interested in or not, and whether it would fit into your setup, be it in the studio or live. This thing is made of steel and is very roadworthy, so I would be totally confident using this live. For me personally, it's just wonderful to have a machine like this where I can chuck a load of my own samples into it, be they drum samples or samples of instruments, chop them up, manipulate them, get something going, and then sync it up with my modular or other bits of equipment, and then have loads of stuff going on at once, and I can program this to do things so that my hands are free to play with modules and that kind of stuff. It's just a fantastic piece of kit. I'm really enjoying having it, regardless of whether I was doing the manual or not. So if you're interested in it, then I do highly recommend it. I'm sure you're thinking I'm biased because I'm doing the video manual, but hand on heart, this is absolutely fantastic. So a big thank you to ISLA Instruments, and thank you for watching.